I wasn't supposed to remember her voice. That's what they teach you at Langley. How to compartmentalize, how to forget, how to turn people into data, and data into silence. They train you to look at faces on screens and see threats, not human beings. They teach you that loyalty to your country means erasing everything else, every doubt, every feeling, every moment that makes you question the line between right and wrong. But I never forgot her voice, Dot. It's been years now. Years since I last sat in that sterile cubicle with 3 monitors glowing in the dark, headphones pressed tight against my ears, translating intercepted communications from Moscow to Langley. Years since I wore the badge that said I mattered, that I was trusted, that I was one of the quiet protectors standing between America and the shadows that wanted to swallow it whole. And yet, every night, I still hear her. Natalia Sokolova. Even now, saying her name feels like a confession. People think spies are the ones who sneak through enemy lines, plant bugs in foreign embassies, seduce targets in candlelit rooms. But most of us never leave our desks. We sit in rooms with no windows, surrounded by cables and encrypted files, listening to voices from the other side of the world, voices that will never know we exist. I was a CIA data analyst. Linguistics division. Russian intercepts. I didn't carry a gun. I didn't have a cover identity. I had a security clearance, a government-issued laptop, and a cubicle in the basement of a building that didn't officially exist. My job was simple. Listen, translate, report. Turn conversations into intelligence. Turn people into targets. And I was good at it. I believed in what I was doing. I really did. After 9/11s, after the wars, after everything we'd seen, I wanted to serve. I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. I wanted to believe that somewhere in the noise, in the endless stream of voices and codes and intercepted calls, I was helping keep people safe. So I learned Russian. Fluent, native level. I studied the syntax, the idioms, the regional dialects. I could tell you whether someone grew up in Moscow or St. Petersburg just by the way they softened their consonants. I could hear a word and know if it was formal, casual, coded, or just noise. And then, one day, in the spring of 2008, I heard her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just another file in a queue of hundreds. An intercept pulled from a satellite relay over Eastern Europe, flagged for review by our algorithm because it contained certain keywords. NATO. Encryption, Washington. I put on my headphones. I clicked play, and there she was. A woman's voice. Clear, calm, speaking Russian, with a precision that felt almost musical. She was reading something aloud, a report, maybe, or a briefing. Her tone was professional, detached, but there was something underneath it. Something human. I replayed it. Again. Most of the voices I translated blurred together after a while. They became background noise, part of the machinery of intelligence. But hers stayed with me. It had weight. It had texture. I ran the voice print through our database. No match. She was new. Or careful. Or both. Over the next few weeks, her voice appeared more frequently. Always in the same context. Russian military intelligence communications, GRU channels, often related to signals intelligence or translation work. I started to piece together who she was. A translator like me. Someone who sat in a room much like mine, on the other side of the world, doing the exact same thing. Listening, translating, reporting. I found myself waiting for her files. I'd scan through the queue, looking for her voice. And when I found it, I'd listen more carefully than I should have. I'd note the little things. The way she paused before difficult words. The faint sound of papers rustling in the background. The barely audible sigh she let out once when a recording cut off mid-sentence. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew her. They tell you not to humanize the enemy. That's one of the first rules. Because the moment you start seeing them as people, as someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who drinks coffee and gets tired and makes mistakes, you stop being effective. But I couldn't help it. I started writing down things about her. Not in my official reports, just in a notebook I kept in my bag. Small observations. The way she pronounced certain words. The cadence of her speech. The rare moments when her voice softened, when she sounded less like an intelligence officer and more like a woman who was tired of reading someone else's words. I told myself it was professional curiosity, that I was building a psychological profile, trying to understand how Russian intelligence trained their translators, what their methods were, what we could learn. But that wasn't it. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. I was lonely. Got Washington in 2008 felt like a city holding its breath. The financial crisis was beginning to crack open. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan dragged on. Inside Langley, we worked longer hours, processed more intercepts, tracked more threats. The world felt unstable, and we were the ones trying to hold it together with nothing but data and discipline. I had no life outside that building. No girlfriend. No close friends. My family was back in Ohio, and I called them once a month, saying nothing real. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Arlington, and every night I came home to silence. The only voice I heard regularly, the only voice that felt real, was hers. I know how that sounds. I know how it looks on paper. A lonely analyst fixating on an enemy operative he's never met. But it wasn't obsession. Not at first. It was connection. For the first time in years, I felt like someone out there understood what I was doing. Someone who knew the weight of listening to other people's secrets. Someone who carried the same burden of silence. It took me 3 months to find her name. Natalia Sokolova. Age 29. GRU linguist, assigned to Signals Intelligence Operations out of St. Petersburg. Educated at Moscow State University. No field experience. No known cover identities. Just like me, a desk officer. A translator. I stared at her file for a long time. There was a photo. Grainy, pulled from a surveillance feed at a government building. She was walking down a hallway, carrying a folder, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup. She looked tired. She looked human. I shouldn't have kept that photo. I shouldn't have saved it to my personal drive. But I did. And every time I translated one of her intercepts after that, I could see her face. I could imagine her sitting in a room just like mine, listening to my voice the way I listened to hers. I wondered if she knew I existed. I wondered if she ever thought about me. The Cold War never really ended. It just went digital. By 2008, the CIA and Russian intelligence were locked in a quiet, relentless battle for information. We monitored their communications. They monitored ours. We planted malware in their systems. They did the same to us. It was a war fought in code, in intercepts, in the silent spaces between words. And people like Natalia and me, we were the foot soldiers. We didn't make policy. We didn't decide who was a target. We just listened, translated, and passed it up the chain. We were taught not to ask questions, not to wonder what happened after we hit send on a report, not to think about the consequences of the intelligence we provided. But I thought about it. Every time I flagged one of Natalia's communications, I wondered where it went, who read it, what they did with it. I wondered if I was putting her in danger. Then, in November 2008, something changed. I was assigned to a joint task force monitoring Russian intelligence activity in Eastern Europe. The focus was on a suspected DRU operation targeting NATO communications infrastructure. It was high priority. compartmented, need to know only. And Natalia's voice was all over it. Her intercepts became more frequent, more detailed. She was working on something big, something that had our analysts on edge. There were references to encrypted files, to meetings in Prague, to a network of assets we didn't fully understand yet. I was told to prioritize her communications, to translate everything, no matter how minor, to look for patterns, keywords, anything that could give us an edge. And I did. But with every file I processed, I felt something twist inside me, because I knew what happened when intelligence like this reached the right people. I knew how operations worked, how assets were identified, how pressure was applied. I knew that if we found something useful in Natalia's work, she wouldn't just be a name in a file anymore. She'd become a target. I started making small mistakes, nothing obvious, nothing that would raise flags. But here and there, in my translations, I'd soften a word. I'd mark a file as low priority when maybe it wasn't. I'd delay a report by a day or two, citing backlog or technical issues. I told myself I was being careful, thorough, that I was just making sure my work was accurate before I submitted it. But I knew the truth. I was protecting her. It didn't last long. In early December, one of Natalia's intercepts mentioned a meeting, a specific date, a specific location in Prague. Our analysts flagged it immediately. They wanted full translation, full analysis, and they wanted it within hours. I sat at my desk, headphones on, listening to her voice describe logistical details for an operation I didn't fully understand. She sounded tired. There was a heaviness in her tone, like she was reading from a script she didn't believe in. I could have mistranslated it. I could have buried it in administrative language, made it sound less urgent than it was. But I didn't, because I knew that if I did, if I sabotaged this report, someone would notice. Someone would review my work, and everything I'd done, everything I'd tried to protect, would unravel. So I translated it accurately, completely, and I sent it up the chain. 3 days later, I learned that a Russian intelligence officer had been detained in Prague. Details were scarce, but the timing matched. The location matched. I never found out if it was connected to Natalia's intercept, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I went home and sat in the dark. I thought about what I'd signed up for, about the oath I'd taken when I joined the CIA, to protect and defend the Constitution, to uphold the mission, to serve my country above all else. I thought about the voices I'd listened to over the years, the people I'd turned into intelligence, the operations I'd helped enable. I thought about Natalia. And for the first time, I wondered if I was on the right side. Weeks passed. Her voice disappeared from the intercepts. At first, I told myself it was routine. Maybe she'd been reassigned. Maybe her unit had gone dark. Maybe the operation had shifted. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into a month, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Fear. For myself. For her, I ran searches through our database. I checked for updates on Russian intelligence personnel. I scanned classified briefs for any mention of GRU linguists, detained operatives, compromised assets. Nothing. She was gone. I should have let it go. I should have moved on. There were always new intercepts, new voices, new threats to track. That's how the job worked. You processed information, and then you forgot it. You didn't get attached. You didn't look back. But I couldn't, because somewhere in the silence, I realized something that terrified me. I cared about her more than I cared about the mission. In February 2009, I did something I never thought I'd do. Accessed files I wasn't supposed to see. I used my clearance to search internal CIA databases for any recent intelligence on Russian personnel, detained or compromised in Eastern Europe. I cross-referenced GUI linguists, signals intelligence officers, operations tied to NATO monitoring. And then I found it. A classified brief. Restricted distribution. Eyes only. It mentioned a Russian intelligence officer detained in Prague in December 2008. Female. GRU. Suspected involvement in signals intelligence operations. No name, no photo. But the description matched. The brief noted that she had been transferred to Moscow for internal investigation. Status: detained. Charges: suspected unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Read that line again and again. Suspected unauthorized disclosure. They thought she was a traitor, and they were going to make her disappear. I don't remember making the decision. I just remember the moment I realized I'd already made it. It was late. The building was nearly empty. I sat at my desk, staring at encrypted files on my screen. Files I had access to because I was trusted. Because I'd spent years proving my loyalty. Because I was supposed to be one of the good guys. And I thought about her, alone, in a cell somewhere in Moscow, facing charges she probably didn't deserve. Caught in the gears of a system that didn't care whether she was guilty or innocent, only whether she was useful. I thought about what would happen to her. The interrogations, the isolation, the quiet disappearance that no one would ever hear about, and I couldn't let it happen. I started pulling files, not randomly, carefully, methodically. I knew what I was looking for. High-level intelligence reports, encrypted communications, operational summaries, the kind of information that had value, the kind of information that could be traded. I didn't take everything. I wasn't reckless. I just took enough to make a deal. I won't tell you how I made contact. I won't tell you what channels I used, what intermediaries I went through, what coded messages I sent into the dark, hoping someone on the other side would understand. But I made contact, and I made an offer. Classified. CIA intelligence. Limited. Specific. Nothing that would endanger active operations. In exchange for one thing. The release of Natalia. SOKOLOVA. It took weeks of silence. Weeks of waiting, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. If I was being watched. If someone had already flagged my access patterns and was building a case against me. But I kept going to work. I kept translating intercepts. I kept pretending everything was normal. Because I had no other choice. In late March, I received a message. Not through official channels. Through a dead drop I'd set up online. An encrypted email account. I checked once a day from a public library in Alexandria. The message was short. She's safe. Thank you. No signature. No confirmation. Just those 3 words. I sat in that library for a long time, staring at the screen, trying to process what I'd just read. She's safe. I didn't know if it was true. I didn't know if they were lying, if this was a trap, if I'd just destroyed my life for nothing. But I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. Lasted another 2 weeks. That's how long it took for them to find me. I knew it was coming. You don't steal classified intelligence from the CIA and walk away. You don't betray your clearance, your oath, your country, and expect to disappear into the crowd. But I didn't run. I went to work that morning like I always did. I sat down at my desk. I logged into my system. And then they came. 2 agents from the Office of Security. Calm. Professional. They asked me to come with them. They didn't cuff me. Not yet. But I knew what this was. They walked me out of the building. Past colleagues who didn't look up. Past security checkpoints I'd walked through 1,000 times. And I didn't fight it. Because I'd already made my choice. The interrogation lasted days. They wanted to know everything. Who I'd contacted. What I'd given them. Why I'd done it. I told them the truth, not the details. Not the methods, but the reason. I told them about Natalia, about the intercepts I'd translated, about the file I'd found that said she was detained, facing charges that would end her life. I told them I couldn't let that happen. They asked me if I understood what I'd done. If I understood that I'd violated federal law, that I'd compromised national security, that I'd betrayed the trust of everyone who'd ever worked beside me. I said yes. They asked me if I regretted it. I didn't answer. I was charged with espionage, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, conspiracy to aid a foreign government. The trial was classified. The evidence was sealed. My name never appeared in the press. I was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. No parole. I'm writing this now from a cell that looks nothing like the movies. It's small, quiet. The walls are cinder block. There's a narrow window that lets in a sliver of light in the mornings. I've been here for 16 years, and I don't regret what I did. I know what that sounds like. I know how easy it is to look at my story and see a traitor. A man who chose a woman he'd never met over the country he swore to serve. A man who broke his oath because he was lonely, because he convinced himself that love, or something like it, mattered more than loyalty. Maybe that's true. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I was a fool. But when I close my eyes, I still hear her voice. And I still see those 3 words. She's safe. Thank you. I don't know where Natalia is now. I don't know if she ever knew what I did. I don't know if she's alive, if she's still working for Russian intelligence, if she ever thinks about the American analyst who listened to her voice and couldn't let her die. I'll never know. But I saved her, and in a world where I spent years turning people into data, where I listened to voices and never saw faces, where I followed orders and never asked if they were right, that one act of defiance, that one moment where I chose a human being over a system, over a mission, over everything I was supposed to believe in, that's the only thing I've ever done that felt real. They tell you that loyalty is black and white, that duty is simple, that you serve your country and everything else falls away. But it's not that simple, because countries are made of people, and missions are just orders passed down from people who will never face the consequences. And loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that keeps you awake at night, isn't about flags or oaths or clearances. It's about the person you couldn't forget, the voice you couldn't let go silent. I think about her often. I imagine her somewhere in Russia, living a life I'll never see. Maybe she got out of intelligence. Maybe she's teaching languages, or working in a library, or sitting in a small apartment with a cup of tea, listening to the rain. I imagine her thinking about Prague, about the operation that went wrong, about the charges she faced, about the narrow escape she doesn't fully understand. I imagine her wondering how she survived. And I hope, God, I hope that somewhere in her memory, she knows, she knows there was someone on the other side of the world who listened to her voice and couldn't let her disappear. Someone who gave up everything to make sure she lived. People ask me if I'd do it again, if I knew then what I know now, if I understood the cost, if I'd still make the same choice. And the answer is yes, because love isn't just about the people you hold. It's about the people you save, the people you protect, even when they never know your name. Natalia Sokolova was the enemy. She worked for Russian intelligence. She was everything I was trained to stop, to monitor, to neutralize. But she was also a woman who sat in a room like mine, translating voices, carrying secrets, living a life that no one would ever see. And when I had the chance to save her, I did, even if it meant losing everything. I was a CIA officer. I believed in my country. I believed in the mission. But in the end, I believed in her more. And that, more than any oath, any clearance, Any sentence is what defines me now. Not the files I stole, not the laws I broke, but the voice I couldn't forget, and the choice I made to keep it from going silent. There's a line I read once, years ago, back when I still believed in the simplicity of duty. It was in a training manual, something about the cost of intelligence work. The sacrifices we make in the name of security, it said, to protect the many. We must sometimes sacrifice the one. I believed that for a long time, but now I think it's backwards. Because if we're willing to sacrifice the one, the person who has a name, a voice, a life, then what are we really protecting? What are we really fighting for? Natalia, if you ever hear this story, if you ever find out what happened, why you were released, why the charges disappeared, know that I don't expect anything. I don't expect gratitude. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to remember my name. But I need you to know this. You weren't just an intercept. You weren't just data. You weren't just the enemy. You were real. And for a man who spent years turning voices into intelligence, who lived in silence and served in shadows, you were the only thing that ever felt like truth. I sit here now, in this cell, and I think about the life I could have had, the career, the promotions, the quiet pride of knowing I served my country well. I think about the colleagues I betrayed, the trust I shattered, the mission I compromised, and I think about her, and I don't regret it, not for a second. They say that love can move mountains, that it can change the course of history, break down walls, bridge impossible divides. For me, it did something simpler, crossed borders, it erased everything I once believed in, and it left me standing here, in the space between two worlds, belonging to neither, loyal to nothing except the voice I could never forget. I'll die in this place. I know that now. I'll never walk free. I'll never see the sky without bars. I'll never hear her voice again. But I saved her, and in the end, that's the only thing that matters. Because in a world of secrets and silence, of missions and betrayals, of countries that demand everything and give nothing back, I chose a person. And that choice, more than anything I ever did in service of my country, is the only thing I'm proud of. So here I am, Thomas Keene, former CIA analyst, convicted traitor, federal prisoner, and the man who loved a voice he never should have. Remember, this is my confession. This is my truth. And if there's a lesson in it, if there's anything worth taking from this story, it's this. Loyalty is easy when it costs you nothing. But love, real love, the kind that demands everything, that's what shows you who you really are. Wasn't supposed to remember her voice, but I did, and I always will.